Ethan woke up to warmth, the kind that felt like a silk-wrapped sauna. His head throbbed. His body ached. Something soft cradled him, like a bed, no, like flesh. He blinked blearily, his vision adjusting to the dim glow of bioluminescent plants on the ceiling. The air smelled sweet, like honey and citrus. A low murmur surrounded him, whispers, gasps, heavy breathing. Then he saw them. Women. Giant. Beautiful. Alien. Women. At least a dozen of them, kneeling around him in a loose circle, their voluptuous figures draped in sheer, gauzy fabric. Some bit their lips. Others clenched their thighs together, hands fidgeting like they were suppressing something primal. Ethan sat up. Hi? A collective gasp. One alien covered her mouth, as if he'd just recited a forbidden spell. Another fainted. Before he could process that, a new figure stepped forward, taller, more regal, wrapped in elaborate silver robes. Her purple-tinted skin shimmered under the glow. Golden eyes locked onto his like a predator sizing up prey. She spoke, voice deep and authoritative. "You have awakened, Sacred One." Ethan blinked. "Sacred One?" She knelt before him, pressing a hand to her chest like she was addressing a god. "Forgive us. We did not expect your arrival, but your presence is a blessing." Ethan glanced around at the dozen pairs of hungry eyes locked onto him. He didn't feel very blessed. More like a piece of meat at an all-you-can-eat buffet. "Okay, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a guy. My escape pod crash-landed and—" "No!" The High Priestess cut him off. "You are no ordinary man." She stood, towering at least 2 feet above him, radiating raw dominance. "The Sacred Ones are the rarest of all beings. We have not laid eyes upon one in over 70 years. Ethan frowned. "You mean men?" A murmur rippled through the women. The word itself seemed taboo. "Yes." The priestess exhaled deeply. "Males are exceedingly scarce in our world. You are the first to arrive in generations. You must be protected, cherished, guarded from harm." Something in her tone made Ethan uneasy. "Guarded from harm, or guarded from you?" She hesitated. A flicker of something carnal flashed in her eyes before she pushed it down. "We have strict laws in place." "Oh, good." Ethan sighed in relief. "So I can go home?" The priestess ignored that entirely. "Our laws dictate that no woman may approach, touch, or seek union with you without my explicit permission." Ethan frowned. "Wait, what?" The women whimpered at her words. One bit her knuckle, eyes brimming with desperate frustration. The priestess continued, ignoring their reaction. "The last Sacred One that came to us perished, drained beyond his limits." Ethan paled. "Drained?" "He was loved too eagerly. His body could not endure. It was a tragedy." Ethan looked around at the women again. Their pained expressions. The way some of them trembled. He swallowed. "So let me get this straight. You're telling me I'm the last steak in a land of starving tigers?" The priestess pursed her lips. "An uncouth comparison, but accurate." Ethan rubbed his face. Jesus. He should have been terrified. But instead, his brain just kept replaying the same thought. "I have a price tag on my D***CK. So what happens now?" he asked hesitantly. The priestess took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You will be given a palace of your own, bathed in the finest oils, clothed in silk, and waited upon day and night." Ethan blinked. "That actually sounds—" "And you will remain completely untouched." He choked. Hold up. "What?" She nodded gravely. "For your safety, no woman may engage in carnal relations with you, under penalty of death." At that, the entire room groaned. One alien fell to her knees in despair. Another muttered something about wasting a miracle. One in the back just screamed into her hands. Ethan was speechless. "So, you're telling me," he said slowly, "that my D***CK is basically a government-controlled resource?" "Yes," the priestess confirmed. A small, miserable voice from the crowd added, "A diamond." Ethan turned to see one alien woman gripping her thighs together, eyes wet with frustration. "It's not fair," she wailed. "We give ourselves freely. Yet one is kept locked away like some forbidden fruit." Another alien hissed, "This is a crime against nature." The priestess silenced them with a glare. "These rules exist to prevent chaos. If you were allowed to choose freely, you would devour him alive." Ethan wasn't sure if she was being metaphorical or literal. One woman clasped her hands together like she was praying. "Please, Sacred One, just one touch?" The priestess slammed her staff onto the ground. "Enough." Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was insane. This wasn't a harem fantasy. It was a goddamn prison sentence. "I just want to go home," he muttered under his breath. The priestess's expression softened, just a little. "We will discuss this in time." She turned to the women. "For now, no one is to speak to the Sacred One without my permission. He must not be tempted." The women groaned again. One covered her eyes, muttering, "I can't do this." Ethan exhaled. Well, this was going to be hell. The days blurred together in a haze of silk, incense, and pure frustration. Ethan wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that he was being treated like a national treasure, or the way the giant alien women lingered. Everywhere he went, they hovered nearby, staring, sighing, whispering. If he so much as stretched, there was gasping. If he yawned, moaning. The palace was ridiculous. He had pillows made from rare moon feathers, gold-plated fruit, a bed the size of a basketball court, and an entire team of attendants whose only job was to maintain his aura of divine masculinity, which apparently involved constant oil massages. Ethan had never been massaged so much in his life. They rubbed his arms, his legs, his chest, always stopping inches away from the one place he actually wanted attention. Every touch was excruciatingly slow. Every breath hot on his skin. And worst of all, every time they pulled away, they'd whisper soft prayers about their eternal suffering. At first, he tried to ignore it. Tried to be polite. But then the accidents started happening. One night, he woke up to heavy breathing in his room. A shadow lurked at the edge of his massive bed, a trembling figure clutching the sheets. "Sacred One," she whispered, "I beg you. I'll die if I don't." Before she could finish, the doors burst open. Guards stormed in. The woman screamed as she was dragged away. Ethan sat there in shock, half naked, fully awake, and extremely confused. The next morning, the priestess stood before him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "This cannot continue," she declared. "They are desperate. They will break the law." Ethan ran a hand down his face. "Then maybe the law is stupid." She stiffened. "The law is necessary." He sighed. "For who?" "Because it's not helping me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We are protecting you. You're cock-blocking me." The priestess flushed slightly. "You do not understand the risk." Ethan folded his arms. "Enlighten me." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Our world once had men. Not many, but some. The few that remained became spoiled, arrogant, selfish. They demanded more and more, pitting us against each other." Ethan blinked. "Okay, but I'm not doing that." She ignored him. "Then they began to die. The demand on their bodies was too great. Even the strongest could not last. By the time we realized our mistake, it was too late." Ethan exhaled. "So, you're saying you have***ed your species into extinction?" She winced. "That is one way to put it." He rubbed his temples. And now I'm the only dude in a world of women who haven't gotten any in decades. She nodded. Ethan let that sink in. Then, in the most calm, rational, well-thought-out manner, he responded. You are all insane. The priestess glared. We are keeping you alive. Ethan laughed. A genuine, bitter laugh. Alive? Lady, I'm not living. I'm just a walking, talking, stay-on dildo that no one can touch. The room fell silent. A distant moan from outside echoed through the halls. Ethan ran a hand down his face. Jesus Christ. The priestess sighed. I know this is difficult. You think? She looked at him for a long moment. Then, voice softer, she said, I will see what I can do. That should have comforted him. It didn't. Ethan woke up to the sound of something slapping against his door. Not knocking. Not tapping. Slapping. He groaned, rolled over, and tried to ignore it. But the slapping continued, slow, deliberate, almost sensual. That was new. He sat up, rubbing his face. I swear to God. Sliding out of bed, he trudged to the door, pulled it open, and froze. On the floor was a pile of letters. Dozens of them, sealed with wax, wrapped in silk, tied with ribbons. Some had kiss marks. One smelled strongly of honey and something suspiciously musky. Ethan blinked. Looked down the hall. Nothing. He crouched, picked up the top letter, and opened it. Sacred One, I know it is forbidden, but I dream of you every night. Your voice is a melody, your scent a torment, your presence an ache I cannot bear. If I do not taste you soon, I fear I will perish. Ethan dropped the letter like it burned him. What the F? He grabbed another. I have studied ancient techniques lost to time. Please, Sacred One, let me worship you as the gods intended. Another. I will give you all that I am. My body, my soul, my family's land. Ethan stopped. Wait. Land? He stared at the letter, rubbing his chin. Then, before he could think too hard about what that said about him, the sound of feet shuffled around the corner. He looked up, just in time to see a figure sprinting away. Hey! The woman yelped, tripped, scrambled to her feet, and bolted. Ethan watched her vanish into the darkness, leaving only the scent of desperation and bad decisions. He sighed, dragging a hand down his face. This was getting out of hand. By noon, he realized the letters were only the beginning. Women had started smuggling gifts into his room. He found bottles of scented oils, trays of exotic fruit, delicate golden chains accidentally left behind, and at one point, an actual live animal, which hissed at him before escaping under his bed. Ethan sat on the edge of his mattress, staring at the chaos surrounding him. This is a hostage situation, he muttered. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He tensed. If you're about to confess your undying lust, the line starts at the door. The priestess entered, expression unreadable. I assume you've noticed the change in behavior. Ethan gestured at the pile of love letters and questionable gifts. What gave it away? She exhaled, stepping forward. I warned them. I forbade it. But the longing is too deep. The rules are breaking. Ethan frowned. Something was off. She was standing too close. Her usual icy composure? Cracking. He narrowed his eyes. You're not here to stop them. Silence. Then, softly, No. Ethan's stomach dropped. She reached up, slowly pulling the golden chain from her throat. It slid down her fingers, pooling in her palm. A symbol of rank. Of control. She held it out. Ethan stared. What are you doing? A flicker of vulnerability crossed her face. The only thing left. The chain clinked as she dropped it at his feet. Then, voice barely above a whisper, she said, Choose me. Ethan stared at the chain on the floor. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavier than the dozens of love letters and desperate confessions piling up in his room.
Choose you?
His voice was cautious. The priestess remained still, her hands clenched at her sides.
If you choose me, the others will stop. They will obey. This madness will end.
He narrowed his eyes.
You're telling me that if I sleep with you, all of this stops?
A flicker of something crossed her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't offense. If anything, it looked like reluctance.
This is the only way,
she admitted.
If you claim a mate, they will have no choice but to respect it.
Ethan folded his arms.
You realize how messed up that is, right?
She gave him a long look, then glanced at the scattered letters, the illicit gifts, the sheer insanity of the past few days.
And you would rather let it continue?
He sighed, dragging a hand through his hair.
Why the hell is this even happening?
He gestured around the room.
Why am I the last steak at an all-you-can-eat buffet?
The priestess hesitated. Ethan scoffed.
Oh, don't start hiding things now. I've had women throwing themselves at me all week, literally, in one case. I want answers.
She exhaled.
The truth is,
she met his gaze.
We were never supposed to have you.
Ethan frowned.
Meaning? The gods do not grant what they cannot take away. For generations, we believed we were forsaken, abandoned to be a tribe of women with no mates. When you arrived, it was...
She paused, searching for the right word.
Revelation.
Ethan let that sink in.
So you're telling me,
he said slowly,
that I'm basically a miracle dick sent from the heavens?
The corner of her mouth twitched.
That is one way to put it.
Ethan shook his head.
I can't believe this. You've turned me into a divine lottery ticket.
The priestess didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was obvious. He sighed.
Okay. Let's say I play along. Let's say I choose you. What happens then?
She hesitated, her fingers flexing at her sides.
Then you are mine. And mine alone.
Ethan stared at her.
You don't sound thrilled about that.
Her jaw tightened.
It is not about what I want. It is about what must be done.
He studied her. The regal posture, the barely contained tension, the careful distance she was keeping. Ethan took a step forward. She didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. He reached out, slowly, fingers brushing against her arm. The reaction was immediate. A sharp inhale. A shudder. Like she wasn't just touched but starved for it. Ethan exhaled.
You've never been with a man, have you?
She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth sat between them, heavy and unspoken. Ethan sighed.
This is insane.
She closed her eyes.
Yes.
He glanced at the letters. The gifts. The absolute circus his life had become. Then back at her. And he made his choice. The air was thick with expectation. Ethan sat on the priestess's massive bed, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. She stood before him, composed yet visibly tense, hands clenched at her sides.
You agree,
she said, her voice steady, but there was something else beneath it. Reluctance? Apprehension? Ethan rubbed his face.
Yeah, I did.
She nodded, stepping closer. He could see the slight tremble in her fingers, the way she kept her shoulders rigid, as if bracing for something.
You're nervous,
he observed. Her jaw tightened.
This is sacred. It is not meant to be taken lightly.
Ethan exhaled.
See, that's the thing. I feel like everyone is taking this too seriously.
He gestured around.
I'm just a guy who crash-landed here. But now, I'm some kind of divine rarity, and this whole village is acting like they've been handed a winning lottery ticket.
The priestess tilted her head.
You believe this is only about your body?
Ethan gave her a look.
Hard not to when half the village has been trying to smuggle themselves into my room.
She studied him for a long moment before stepping even closer.
It is not only about your body,
she said, voice quieter now.
It is about what you represent.
Ethan frowned.
Which is?
She hesitated. Then, softly,
hope.
He wasn't expecting that. The priestess sat beside him, close but not touching.
Our people have lived with the belief that we would be alone forever, that we were forsaken. And then you arrived. You changed everything.
Ethan exhaled.
That's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on one guy.
She nodded.
It is.
They sat in silence for a moment. Ethan turned to her.
So what now?
She hesitated again.
Now we complete the ritual.
He swallowed.
And that means...
Her fingers tightened in her lap.
We seal the bond. You claim me as your mate, and the others will have no choice but to accept it.
Ethan could hear his pulse in his ears.
And you're sure that's the only way?
She met his gaze.
Yes.
Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Then, after a long pause,
all right.
She stilled, watching him carefully. He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. Her breath caught. Ethan gave a small, tired smile.
Guess we'd better make it count, huh?
The priestess lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. The room was still, the silence stretching between them like an invisible barrier neither knew how to cross. Ethan exhaled.
So now what?
She remained quiet for a long moment before finally saying,
Now, the village will accept it. The others will stop.
Ethan snorted.
You really think that's going to happen?
She turned her head toward him, her golden eyes flickering with something unreadable.
They must. The law is absolute.
He sat up, running a hand through his hair.
Yeah? Well, from what I've seen, laws don't mean much when desperation's involved.
She sighed.
They will obey, or they will be punished.
Ethan raised a brow.
And who exactly is enforcing that? You?
She hesitated.
If necessary.
Ethan laughed dryly.
Great. So I'm just supposed to live my life hoping a group of 6-foot-plus, love-starved warrior women don't decide to rebel and drag me off into the jungle?
She sat up too, adjusting the intricate fabric wrapped around her.
You exaggerate.
He gave her a pointed look.
Am I? You weren't the one dodging ambush hugs in the middle of the damn marketplace.
She pressed her lips together, as if suppressing amusement.
They will adjust.
Ethan huffed.
Right. Sure.
A knock at the door made them both freeze. The priestess's eyes narrowed. Slowly she stood, smoothing her clothing before making her way to the heavy wooden doors. She cracked it open, revealing a flustered guard. The woman bowed her head.
Apologies, High Priestess, but there is an issue.
The priestess exhaled through her nose.
Of course there is.
Ethan groaned.
Let me guess. Some of them aren't taking this well.
The guard hesitated.
There have been protests.
Ethan snorted.
Of course there have.
The priestess gave him a sharp look before turning back to the guard.
Handle it. Make it clear that the law is final.
The guard nodded and disappeared. Ethan leaned back on his hands.
What a bet that handling it means at least one of them is gonna try sneaking into my room tonight.
The priestess pinched the bridge of her nose.
You test my patience.
Ethan smirked.
Yeah. Try being the only guy on a planet full of women who think you're some kind of divine fertility god.
She turned, stepping closer until she loomed over him.
You are mine now. That should be enough.
Ethan looked up at her, studying the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers twitched slightly at her sides.
Yeah.
His voice was quieter now.
And is it enough for you?
For the first time, she faltered. And Ethan realized something. This wasn't just about control. It wasn't just about laws or customs. She was afraid. Afraid of losing. Afraid that this fragile balance she created would shatter the second he chose to walk away. Ethan sighed.
Look, I don't know what the hell's gonna happen. But I do know one thing.
She met his gaze.
I'm not gonna let them turn me into some sacred breeding relic.
Her lips parted slightly, surprised. Ethan smirked.
So if I'm yours, you'd better be ready to fight for it.
The corner of her mouth twitched. Then, finally, a small, quiet chuckle. Ethan grinned.
See? Progress.